God of War Ragnarök has finally made its way to PC after being a PlayStation exclusive for 2 years now. So, although it is technically an older game, it does still look amazing on the PC and it plays incredibly well. It also incorporates a number of new technologies such as DLSS 3, FSR 3.1 and XeSS 1.3 upscaling, as well as FSR and DLSS frame generation. The game's built on an unnamed engine developed by Santa Monica Studio, who have worked on the God of War series since 2005. Of course, the engine has been updated for Ragnarok, supporting stuff like the upscaling features just mentioned, along with the required DirectX 12. But there is no ray tracing, which I'm sure very few of you will be upset to hear, because the game still looks great and it plays even better. This means you'll be able to enjoy God of War Ragnarok in all of its glory, with surprisingly modest hardware, unlike a lot of the AAA games that we've already looked at this year. Still, if you are in need of an upgrade, the data in this video will help you work out exactly what you need to achieve your desired frame rate. Now, for testing, we are using one of the more demanding sections that we've found in the game after nearly 4 hours of gameplay, and this small snippet of the benchmark pass shouldn't give anything away in regards to the story. Now, because God of War Ragnarok was initially a PS4/PS5 exclusive, it's designed with very weak CPU requirements in mind, and therefore you're almost certainly going to see very little CPU usage on a modern PC, assuming that is that you have a Zen 3 CPU or newer. Realistically, you're going to end up 100% GPU limited in this one. There are some larger open world type sections, but they're not populated with anything really. And again, this is due to the CPU constraints on those older consoles. Now for this testing, I'm looking at the 1080p, 1440p and 4K resolutions using the ultra, high and medium presets. It is worth noting that you can change the presets on the fly, and most of the changes do seem to apply, but I found a full game reset is required to enable all settings, as you will see a slight change in FPS. And of course, it is always best practice to reset the game between quality setting changes for benchmarking, so we've done that for all of this testing, and thankfully, God of War Ragnarok is a very quick game to exit and then reload. Finally, for testing the GeForce GPUs, I'm using Game Ready Driver 561.09, and for the Radeon GPUs, Adrenal Edition 24.20.11.01, but please note I also tried the official 24.8.1 driver, as we were seeing some sort of performance issues and some weird scaling, but both drivers seem to deliver the same performance. I've also included Intel's Arc A770 using the driver version 32.0.101.6078. Okay, let's get in the data. Starting with the 1080p Ultra results, we find that the RTX 4090 is good for 159 FPS, and this is at native 1080p, so a good result I'd say, especially given how good the game looks. The 4080 and 4080 Super were good for 134 FPS, which was considerably faster than the Radeon RX 7900 XTX, which was 13% slower. In fact, the flagship Radeon GPU was only able to match the 4070 Ti Super, meaning the 7900 XT was down alongside the 4070 Super, only slightly ahead of the old RTX 3080. And the good news is, for just 60 FPS, you'll only require a 7700 XT or 3060 Ti, while the 4060 Ti was a little bit faster. Then for those of you happy with around 45 FPS, you can get away with the old Radeon RX 6600 XT, though I'd suggest dialing down the quality settings for 60 FPS or better, but again, that's a personal preference, that one. Now at 1440p, we're increasing the GPU load, and this appears to benefit the Radeon GPUs, as the 7900 XTX is now 9% slower than the RTX 4080 and 6% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. The 7900 XT's also stepped up to the RTX 3090 and is now able to match the 4070 Super exactly. Then for over 60 FPS, under these conditions, you will require at the very least the 7900 GRE or RTX 4070. Beyond that, we are in the sub 60 FPS territory, though we do see the 7700 XT close in on the 4060 Ti. And I should note that for our short benchmark pass, the 8 and 16GB versions of the 4060 Ti delivered the same results. But I can't guarantee that will be the case for extended gameplay, and that's something we'll have to look at in future content. Then for those of you who want to play God of War Ragnarok at the native 4K resolution with the maximum quality preset, you'll want to make sure you have a serious GPU, and that's pretty typical, as even the RTX 4090 couldn't crack 100 FPS in our test. The 1700 XTX averaged 71 FPS, but this time that was enough to roughly match the RTX 4080 and 4080 Super. Then, just getting by with 60 FPS is the 4070 Ti Super. The 1700 XT and 4070 Ti just fell short, but some upscaling would get them there, and I'll look at that soon. Dropping the visual preset from Ultra to High improves performance by 10 to 15%, depending on the GPU. The good news is this means at 1080p, most GPUs will be able to render 60 FPS. From AMD, the Radeon RX 6750 XT achieved this, and from Nvidia, the RTX 4060 was good enough. AMD's latest entry-level offering though, the RX 7600, that was disappointing with just 52 FPS. That's 6600 XT-like performance. Now, increasing the resolution to 1440p, we see that the 6800 XT and RTX 3070 are required for 60 FPS, and from the current generation, the 7800 XT managed 64 FPS and the RTX 4070 a more impressive 75 FPS. Then we see that the 1700 XT and 4070 Super are able to deliver around 90 FPS, and then the 1700 XTX, it found itself between the 4070 Ti Super and RTX 4080 with 106 FPS. Then at 4K, we again find that the game is very demanding, but even so, most high-end GPUs will deliver excellent performance. The 4070 Super, for example, managed 60 FPS, and of course you can enable DLSS upscaling to improve performance further. The 1700 XT was also right there with 63 FPS, and the 1700 XTX was able to match the RTX 4080 and 4080 Super. Then of course we find the RTX 4090 is way out in front with an impressive 110 FPS. Now, using the medium preset, you can expect around a 15 to 20% performance improvement from high, or a massive 30 to 35% increase from ultra. And as a result, the RTX 4090 is now pushing over 200 FPS at 1080p, and almost every GPU tested can render at least 60 FPS on average, with the only exceptions being the 6600 XT, RX 6600, and Arc A770. Everything else ran really well, and the game still looks quite good. Upping the resolution to 1440p, we're still seeing great performance out of most GPUs, and for those of you happy with just 60 FPS, you can get away with the RX 6800, RTX 3060 Ti, 7700 XT, or 4060 Ti. Then for a smoother 80 to 90 FPS experience, the RTX 4070 or 7900 GRE will be required, and for over 100 FPS, the 4070 Super and 7900 XT work well. Then finally, at 4K, using the medium preset, it is possible to push well past 100 FPS with the RTX 4090. The 4070 Ti did manage 81 FPS, and the 4070 Ti Super 82 FPS, and then the 1700 XTX was just shy of 90 FPS, making it a few frames slower than the RTX 4080. So again, the Radeon GPUs are really only competitive in this title at 4K, which is a bit odd. Now here's a look at preset scaling at 1080p, using the RTX 4070 Super and 7900 XT. Again, the Radeon GPU doesn't scale that well at 1080p, especially with the low quality preset. Oddly, whereas the 4070 Super saw a massive 30% performance uplift when dialing down the quality preset from medium to low, the 7900 XT only saw a 6% increase. Outside of that though, performance and scaling between these two GPUs is very similar, using the medium, high, and ultra presets at 1080p. Now at 1440p, we do see more consistent scaling from the 7900 XT, and again, both GPUs are very evenly matched. We're looking at around a 14% increase using high over ultra, and then an 18% uplift with medium, and 21% uplift for the 1700 XT when going from medium to low, but a much larger 32% increase for the 4070 Super. Then at 4K, scaling is very similar between the 1700 XT and 4070 Super. We're looking at an 11 to 13% improvement with high over ultra, 15 to 16% from high to medium, and then a 21 to 26% uplift from medium to low. Lastly, let's take a look at upscaling performance. For all of the testing so far, I've stuck with temporal anti-aliasing, just so we're able to provide apples to apples data. As you can see here, TAA is quite a bit faster than DLSS running at the native resolution. So DLAA, you're looking at around 16% greater performance with TAA. Using the Ultra preset, we found a 32% improvement with quality upscaling enabled, though that is just a 14% uplift when compared to the native TAA result. Then with the low preset, we're seeing just a 15% uplift with quality DLSS enabled at 1080p, which is 9% faster than native TAA. Then with the 7900 XT, we find that TAA is faster than FSR, 12% faster using the Ultra preset at the native resolution. FSR quality upscaling did boost performance by 27%, though that's just a 13% increase over native TAA. Then with the low preset, we did find that odd 140 FPS limit that the Radeon GPUs seem to run into, so not entirely sure what is going on there. It's possible that a future driver release will address this. Increasing the resolution to 1440p, we start to see less of a performance gap between FSR and DLSS when compared to TAA, with TAA now just 5 to 7% faster. We're also looking at around a 25% boost with quality upscaling enabled, at least with the Ultra preset. And again, the 7900 XT runs into that 140 FPS wall with FSR upscaling. Finally, at 4K, we're looking at a 6 to 10% performance difference between AMD and Nvidia's implementations when compared to TAA. In the case of the 4070 Super, we found a 38% uplift with quality upscaling enabled, and a 37% uplift for the 7900 XT, and then a slightly higher 41 to 44% margin using the low preset. So there you have it, a great looking game that actually plays well on modest PC hardware. To be fair though to some of those other games we've tested, there often isn't that much happening in God of War Ragnarök. So in that sense, it is a rather basic game. You don't exactly come into NPC heavy open world environments that you'd see in a game such as Cyberpunk, for example, but it's still a well put together game that looks great, and as I said, it does play very well. The fact that you can play at native 1440p using the maximum in-game quality preset and still render over 60 FPS on an RTX 4070 or 7900 GRE is pretty good, and we're testing one of the most demanding sections of the game that we came across after more than 3 hours of gameplay. And if you're happy with the medium preset, which in my opinion still looks very good, achieving 60 FPS becomes really easy with a GPU such as the RTX 3060 Ti or RX 6800. And of course, you can enable quality upscaling for around a 30% performance bump, which should land you at around 80 FPS. Now, as I noted earlier, this game isn't at all CPU demanding, and again, that's in part due to the fact that there are very few NPCs. It does, however, take up a large amount of disk space, with the install on our test system weighing in at a massive 175 gigabytes, which seems a bit excessive, I know, but ultimately I do agree with the choice here. Had the developer more heavily compressed the game, the gaming experience wouldn't be as seamless as it is, likely suffering decompression stalls, which often result in horrible frame stutters. Also, keep in mind you don't need to download 175 gigabytes of data, though the download is still rather large at 100 gigabytes. But again, I'm okay with this decision. Storage space is relatively cheap now, and you don't have to keep the game installed. Once you're done, you can move it to a really cheap hard drive, or if your internet speed and bandwidth is not an issue, you could just delete it and download it whenever you want it again in the future. And as crazy as some of you might find a 175 gigabyte game install, it is worth keeping in mind that heavy decompression can result in in-game stuttering, long load times, or potentially stability issues. So it is a trade-off, and I think it's one worth making. As for VRAM usage, the game does seem very reasonable here. Texture quality isn't amazing, but it's still certainly very good, and I have seen usage go above 9GB at 1440p, but as I noted earlier, I haven't had a chance to do extensive 8GB versus 16GB testing yet. Though be aware that 6GB is the minimum amount of VRAM required to play this game, though a recent patch will allow you to try and play it on 4GB cards, but the developer does warn of poor performance and potential crashing. Also, stuff like DLSS frame generation will require more VRAM, and therefore probably won't work that well on 8GB cards using ultra quality settings. But again, I will have to explore this in future content. DLSS frame generation was also broken when the game was first released, but patch 2 did solve this, so it should be working now. Anyway, it's great to see another exciting high-quality game land on PC this year, especially one that you can happily enjoy using previous generation hardware. And that is going to do it for this video. If you liked it, you know what to do. Do the subscribe thing, I suppose, if you haven't already. We also have the join button enabled now, so you can become a member on YouTube. Maybe that's something you want to do, not sure. We also have Patreon. You can sign up to Patreon. Either one of those gives you access to our exclusive Discord server. You'll find BTS content there. There's Q&A stuff. And yeah, a lot of cool stuff worth checking out if you're interested. But if not, perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.